To continue, the truth about clergy sexual abuse. Part 1. Separating fact from fiction. Chapter 1. Catholics don't own this problem. Branding all priests as predators has a long, ugly history in the United States. In the mid-1830s, the awful Disclosure of Maria Monk became the best-selling book, second only to the Bible in American religious publishing. Although it was totally false, it promoted the notion that nuns were sexual slaves of priests. The offenders allegedly entered the convents via subterranean passages. The principal writer of this nonsense was Reverend J. Slocum, a Protestant minister. Having sold 300,000 copies before the Civil War, he succeeded in poisoning the minds of natives who hated Catholicism. In the 20th century, Hitler picked up where Maria Monk tales left off. David Kurtzer is the author of a well-received book on the Catholic Church. He was asked by the correspondent for National Public Radio about a comment he made saying that Hitler threatened to disgrace the Catholic Church. Kurtzer's response is jarring. Hitler was talking about pederasty and other kinds of sexual pederasty and other kinds of sexual scandals. And in fact, he did create a series of what we refer as high-profile morality trials against priests, but also against monks and nuns, in which they were charged with all sorts of depraved behaviors of orgies and abusing children and so forth. And he saw this. Hitler saw this kind of weapon that he could use to discredit the Catholic Church. If Maria Monk and Hitler sought to discredit the Church, today's enemies seek to disable it. Instead of telling malicious lies, they prefer to convince the public that the Catholic Church has a unique problem with sexual offenders. And this is patently untrue. Catholics don't own this problem. The editorial board of the Philadelphia Inquirer admits that there have been sexual abuse scandals at other institutions, including public schools, universities, other religious organizations, the media, politics, and Hollywood. But nowhere has the abuse been as widespread and accountability so discarded as in the Catholic Church. The Washington Post agrees that saying the Church has a unique history as a haven for abusers will be demonstrated. As will be demonstrated, both editorials are factually incorrect. The John Jay College of Criminal Justice in the New York City, which authored two major studies on clergy sexual abuse for the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, USCCB, came to a different conclusion. Sexual victimization of children is a serious and pervasive issue in the society. It is present in families and is not uncommon in institutions where adults form mentoring and nurturing relationships with adolescents, including schools and religious sports and social organizations. The college also stated, citing its two studies, that no organization has undertaken a study of itself in the manner of the Catholic Church. This remains true today. It is a credit to John Jay researchers that they offered a brief summary of many secular religious organizations that have been beset by problems of sexual abuse. Still, there were inconsistencies in the first report, saying that few instances of abuse were reported to the police. Yet the same report says that approximately 24% of the priests accused of abuse were reported to the police. Commenting on nationwide totals that were inclusive of every sector of society, the report says only 5.7 of the incidences were reported to the police. By contrast, then, Catholic Church has done a much better job. In 1985, a survey by the Los Angeles Times found that 27% of women and 16% of men said that they were sexually abused as children. Just 3% of those alleged cases reported to the police. In 2010, Ernie Allen, the president of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, said, "We don't see the Catholic Church as hotbed of this sexual abuse of children, or a place that has bigger problems than anyone else." Did I read that right? The president of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children said, "We don't see the Catholic Church as a hotbed of this sexual abuse of children, or a place that has a bigger problem than anyone else." In 2019, it was said that more than 60,000 children are reported to have been abused every year, outnumbering those killed by guns or cars. Sexual abuse in non-Catholic religious institutions. No other religious body collects data on its clergy and on so many variables the way the Catholic Church does. Most religious are decentralized and lack uniform protocols for saving records. That's a plus and a minus for the church. It's a plus because we have much more accurate profile of priests and deacons than we do for their counterparts in other religions. It's a minus because lawyers out to plunder the church have a reliable and extensive source of data to apply, even allowing for inexact comparisons. From what we know, it's obvious that the Catholic Church has no monopoly on sexual abuse. Pastor Jimmy Hinton presides over the Church of Christ congregation on Somerset, Pennsylvania. Speaking of sexual abuse, he says, "Some people assume this is a Catholic problem. It's not at all. There are plenty of Protestants and non-denominational churches that cover up abuse, knowingly pass abusers from the church to church, or quietly dismiss a known abuser and don't bother to check up on the abuser, and don't know where they're settled." Basil Chavvidian, I don't know how to pronounce that, a Liberty University law professor and grandson of Billy Graham, agrees. "Protestants can be very arrogant when pointing to Catholics," he says. "I think we are worse." In spring 2002, when the sexual abuse scandal in the Catholic Church was receiving unprecedented attention, the Christian Science Monitor reported on the results of national surveys by Christian ministry resources. The conclusion was an eye-opener. Despite headlines focusing on the priest-pedophile problem in the Roman Catholic Church, most American churches being hit with child sexual abuse allegations are Protestants, and most of the alleged abusers are not clergy or staff, but church volunteers. Professor Philip Jenkins, author of a book on the Catholic scandal, determined that between 0.2 and 1.7% of priests were pedophile. The figures among the Protestant clergy ranged from 2 to 3%. 1.7%. Yeah, okay. In 2018, the Fort Worth Star-Telegram invested sexual abuse at independent fundamentalist Baptist churches. It found that 187 allegations of abuse made against him, involving 412 cases of sexual misconduct. The churches operate independently, but some are affiliated with colleges. You don't report to the police because the pastor is an ultimate authority, not the government, says one churchgoer. Another congregant, who's twice escaped being a victim of attempted sexual misconduct, said, "It's been the MO in a fundamentalism for pastors and churches and ministries to gloss over and sweep under the rug things of absolute epic proportion. Things of absolute epic proportion. What happened to pastors who covers up the abuse? What happens to the What happens to pastors who cover up the abuse? Not only are consequences rare, but in some cases the abused are even forced to apologize in front of the congregation. The reports have found that three main tactics are used by these churches. Pastors ship suspected abusers to other churches or church-affiliated schools. Pastors recommend a suspected abuser for a new job without informing the church or school about the allegations. Pastors pressures victims to keep quiet, telling them they'll ruin the alleged abuser's ministry, or the pastors simply don't believe the accusations. Some members of the Catholic Church did the exact same thing, but their lousy judgment has been broadcast all over the nation and for years on end. The Southern Baptist Convention is the largest Protestant denomination in the nation. A 1993 survey by Journal of Pastoral Care found that 14% of Southern Baptist ministries said they had engaged in inappropriate sexual behavior, and 70% said they knew of a minister who had such contact with a church member. In 2019, an investigation by the Houston Chronicle and the San Antonio Express News found that there have been more than 700 people, most of them children, had been sexually abused by the Southern Baptist pastors, church employers, or volunteers during the past 2 decades. The newspaper also revealed that nearly 400 Southern Baptist leaders have pleaded guilty to or been convicted of sex crimes. The reporter said that some of these churches use written agreements that offer legal protections to the institution, and that they prohibit members from suing the church. Worse, an organization abuse prevention company, Ministry Safe, which is supposed to be a victim's advocate, is run by legal advisors of some of the churches. Jehovah's Witnesses has had its history of sexual abuse as well, and New York Times found that most of the reported victims are girls, and that many accusations involve incest. An adult male came forward in 2019 to tell how he was sexually abused by a church elder when he was 2 or 3 years old. This went on approximately 4 to 6 times per week. For 4 years, the abuser served 3.5 years. For 4 years. The abuser served 3.5 years in prison and then returned to the ministry. A culture of secrecy prevented the new congregants from learning of his past. Not as much information is available about sexual abuse in the Muslim community, but matters are bad enough to have warranted the founding face of abuse in community environments. FACE, the founding of Facing Abuse in Community Environments, FACE. It was created by Muslim women activists and lawyers to pursue predators. In one case that made media splash in 2019, an a man from Texas began counseling 13-year-old girls, and 5 years later, he presented himself as their potential spouse. At the time, he had already had 2 wives and no intention of marrying the girl, Jane Doe. He began grooming Jane to become more sexualized and ultimately engage in illicit sexual acts with him. Faith was responsible for bringing him to justice. In 2020, the Herma Project was launched to combat sexual abuse in the Muslim community. According to the Canadian founder Ingrid Mattson, the term Herma means sacred inviolability. Violability from exploitation and abuse. Mattson, who is the first woman, first convert, and first North American-born president of the Islamic Society of North America, held a conference at the American Islamic College in 2020 to call attention to sexual abuse in the Islamic community. They were organized to bring sex abuse by sheiks out of the shadows. Jews have also had their problems with sexual abuse. In 2019, almost a year after an independent investigation found the executive director of the largest camping organization in North America guilty of sexual abuse or harassment. Wait, let me reread that. Okay, in 2019, almost a year after an independent investigation found the executive director of the largest camping organization in the largest camping organization in North America guilty of sexual abuse or harassment, the entire board of the NJY camps, a Jewish associate in New Jersey, resigned. The 60-member board voted to disband after it became known that the top leadership knew of sexual misconduct for years and did nothing about it. When a member of the Catholic Church clergy is suspected of sexual abuse, he is brought before a tribunal for investigation. If the case is deemed credible, the authorities are contacted. Pending a probe, in Orthodox Jewish circles, a rabbinical court, or Beth Din, does the investigation, and at no time are the authorities notified. Not even the media can know. No one shall bring to any media outlet information about the resident that could, if publicized, lead to an investigation or intensified prosecution by any law enforcement agency. That is how the Beth Din in Brooklyn handles matters. David Schwebel, a noted New York lawyer who handles cases of sexual abuse for Orthodox Jews, made it clear that under religious law, if a rabbi tells one of his followers not to go to the police, he must follow that ruling. Schwebel, a lawyer of Agudas Israel, does not hesitate to condemn Orthodox dissidents who speak up about sexual abuse. He accuses them of trafficking in malicious gossip, evil tongue, and a waste of time, all of which are prohibited by the Torah. The media treats such instances in passing, as if we were a human interest story. Yet if a Catholic bishop told their flock that under the church law they may not contact civil authorities when a crime is suspected, they would be subject of explosive headlines. How much longer is this? Okay. All right. Sexual abuse in secular institution. It would take a big book to detail all the secular institutions and professions that have been plagued with sexual misconduct. Indeed, there is enough material to fill volumes. For the sake of brevity, here are some examples that barely get mentioned in the media but are worth noting. It shows once again that Catholics don't own this problem. The family. Preschoolers living with one natural parent and one step parent were 40 times more likely to become children abuse cases than were liked aged children. Okay, let me read that. Preschoolers living with one natural parent and one step parent were 40 times more likely to become children abuse cases than were liked aged kids living with two natural parents. About 45% of the offenders of child sexual abuse are family members, babysitters, neighbors, family friends, or relatives. About 1 in 6 child molesters are other children. Children in households with unrelated adults were nearly 50 times as likely to die from inflicted injuries than children residing with two biological parents. Children living with their married biological parents universally had the lowest rate of maltreatment, whereas those living with single parents had a cohabiting partner in the household had the highest rate in all maltreatment categories. An estimated 60% of perpetrators of sexual abuse are known to the child but are not family members, e.g., family friends, babysitters, child care providers, neighbors. About 30% of perpetrators of child sexual abuse are family members. Only about 10% of perpetrators of sexual abuse are strangers to the child. Not all perpetrators are adults. An estimated 23% of reported cases of child sexual abuses are perpetrated by individuals under the age of 18. Boy Scouts. In February 2020, the Boy Scouts of America filed for Chapter 11 in bankruptcy court in 1970. The Boy Scouts had 5 million members. By 2020, that number had been cut in half. In 2020, its assets of $1 billion in liabilities, ranging from $500 million to $1 billion. By 2020, that number had been cut in half. In 2020, it had assets of $1 billion and liabilities ranging from $500 million to $1 billion. This decline was largely due to a mountain of sexual abuse lawsuits. In recent years, an expert hired by the organization reviewed decades of record and reported that there were nearly 8,000 perpetrators. In November 2020, it was reported that the Boy Scouts will face more than 92,000 claims of sexual abuse. The number of claims and the total payouts to settle them will easily eclipse those of the sexual abuse scandals that engulfed the U.S. Catholic Church more than a decade ago, plaintiffs' lawyers say. The military. More than 100,000 men have been sexually assaulted in the military in the recent decades. Women face a much higher rate of sexual assault in the military, about 7 times that of men. Migrant children. Thousands of migrant children who have crossed the borders into the U.S. have reported that they were sexually abused while in government custody. homes for the disabled. Hundreds of pages of disciplinary records from 2015 to 2017 obtained by the New York Times under the state open records law show that there are more than one-third of the employees statewide found to have committed abuse-related offenses at group homes, and other facilities were put back on the job, often after arbitration with a workers' union. Recycling abuse employees has long been an epidemic problem. 8 years ago, the Times reviewed thousands of pages of disciplinary files for 233 workers, and a quarter of substantiated abuse cases. Employees were transferred to other homes rather than fired, including in cases involved with sexual assault. Indian reservations. Federal and state officials say they have documented glaring flaws in the child welfare system in the Spirit Lake Indian reservations in North Dakota, contending that while child abuse there isn't at epidemic levels, the tribe has sought out to conceal it. The problems uncovering by medical and social services administrators include fostering children on the reservations who have been sent to homes where registered sex offenders live, and a teenage female sex abuse victim who was placed in a tribal home was subsequently raped. The tribe, according to federal officials, also hired a children's caseworker who had been convicted of felony child abuse, and employed another social worker who discovered a 1-year-old child covered with 100 wood ticks but did not take the child to a hospital. The tribe, according to the federal and state administrators, has not conducted required background checks before placing foster children, failed to make mandated monthly visits to children in foster care, and illegally removed foster children from homes and placed them elsewhere without determining that they knew homes would be safe. Physicians. The Citizen Commission on Human Rights says that in its public database of criminal and disciplinary actions committed by mental health industry personnel, and a third of criminal convictions are for sexual abuse committed by psychiatrists, psychologists, therapists, counselors, including the sexual abuse of children. Doctors. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution conducted a national investigation of doctors and found that 2,400 doctors publicly disciplined. Found that of the 2,400 doctors publicly disciplined after allegations of sexual misconduct with patients, half still have active medical license today. The investigations examined documents that describe disturbing acts of physician sexual abuse in every state, rapes by the OB/GYNs, seductions by psychiatrists, fondling by anesthesiologists, and ophthalmologists, and molesting by pediatricians and radiologists. Victims were babies, adolescents, women in their 80s, drug addicts, and jail inmates, survivors of childhood sexual abuse. Only 11 states have a law requiring medical authorities to report to the police or prosecutors when they suspect a sexual crime has been committed against an adult. Camps. CBS News has identified hundreds of reports of sexual abuse that occur at children's camps across the United States, We found reports more than 500 victims who were allegedly sexually abused at children's camps for over the past 50 years. More than 14 million people attend camps each year, but there are no national regulations for camps to follow. 8 states have no requirements for overnight camps to be licensed, and 18 states don't require background checks for employees. Alright, let me just stop this there. This is part 1.